Good evening. I'm Eric Greenberg, Chair of the FY24 CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this work session is being live streamed. You can find the agendas and background materials for this evening on the CA Board of Directors webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those watching this work session there. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure that your cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak and I'll record the names in the order which I see them. If you're virtual, please use the chat feature. As we move through the work session, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate the motion, as well as who motioned and seconded. If you have any trouble hearing me or any member present, please say so. Tonight's timekeeper is Alan Klein. I will now call the roll. Sky.
Here.
Reg.
Here.
Karen.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
Alan.
Here.
Dennis.
Here.
Keith.
Here.
Bill.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
And I am here. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I
So
move
moved.
to approve the agenda.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Are there any objections to the agenda? Seeing no objections, the agenda is passed by unanimous consent. We will now move on to resident speak out. Speakers will be asked to speak in the order which they signed up. Individuals have 3 minutes for comment. Anyone representing an organization has 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask questions. Please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. We ask that speakers adhere to the 3 or 5 minute time limit when presenting their testimony, and for board members to limit questions in order to stay within the allotted time period. Tonight's first speaker is Bob Dover.
Good evening, folks.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
I appreciated the recent discussions of potential revisions to your easement policy. The staff proposed some enhancements a few weeks ago to their public engagement process, which I hope is a sign that they now recognize the importance of coordinating projects with adjacent homeowners before project decisions are finalized. The only question now is how to do that effectively. If CA is serious about actually engaging with the residents, and I'm not sure you are, then the enhancements proposed a few weeks ago will be completely ineffective. While notification to villages and signage should be done, they are passive methods, and are not an effective replacement for active methods. Few residents come to village meetings, and placing a sign down the street and hoping the residents see it is not an effective communication method. Both of these methods are unacceptable on both state and federal level, which require direct mailings to affected residents. That's their standard practice, and it's not that difficult. I find it ironic that if I want to make landscaping changes or remove trees on my property that would alter the visual aesthetics of my neighborhood, I not only have to notify CA through the architectural committee system, but I have to ask their permission. When CA wants to do the same on a much larger scale, are you required to get architectural approval and notify the adjacent property owners? The fact that I pay assessments to CA to be treated this way just adds insult to injury. I've lived in my house now for 5 years, and in that time, CA has approved 2 separate easements for destructive activities directly along my property boundary without ever once notifying me. I've been a member of CA since 1995, and I used to think that the use of architectural and landscaping covenants to maintain the aesthetics of the community was a good thing. Now I understand that these restrictions only apply to us little people, and that the largest landowner in the community can cut down acres of trees on a whim without directly notifying neighbors, without considering adverse impacts to adjacent properties, and without providing a scientifically sound justification. Despite the videos that you play at the start of these meetings about how wonderful the CA community is, the fact is that CA is a bad neighbor to some of us who live adjacent to CA's open space. The current discord between CA and some of the residents over stream restorations isn't entirely due to the nature of the projects. It's mostly due to CA's approval of the projects without any active community engagement and based on documents loaded with misinformation. The problem isn't that we don't like your projects. The problem is that we feel you're not being truthful about them. Passive notifications and limiting affected residents to 3-minute speakouts are not effective ways to work collaboratively with the community. Please correct this by requiring direct notification and an active public engagement program when revising your easement policy. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Andy.
Yeah, Bob. You are aware that, CA does not handle the covenants, that your village, Long Reach, handles covenants, and so it's their rules in particular for notifications, and not every village has the same rules. Are you aware?
I understand that.
So,
I think it's a shame that you're not required to follow that, and I am.
But Yeah, each
Yes.
village gets to decide. Thanks.
Any other questions? Actually, I do have one question. So you said you weren't notified of easements adjacent to your property. So the question I have is, how did you find out about them? And when did you find out about them? relative to
There
what
were two of
project?
them. One was the easement you issued to DPW for the work at Sewell's Orchard Pond. I learned about that by watching a guy drive a stake in my backyard. And the Elkhorn Branch project, I learned about when I eventually got the MDE notification, but that was 6 months after you guys approved the easement.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Charles Douglas Jarrett, representing the Howard County Everytown Survivor Network.
Good evening, and thank you for putting us on the agenda. I want to hand out copies. I don't want you to read it. We're not going to go through them today. But just so everyone has a chance at their leisure to read it, because it provides a very good description of the activities and the interests of the Survivor Network. Before I get to our three requests today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Survivors Network. The Survivors Network is a support group for persons who have been impacted by gun violence. Parents whose children have committed suicide by use of a gun, bystanders injured by stray bullets, persons threatened with gun violence, persons whose spouses harmed or threatened to harm them with guns, and broadly victims and survivors of gun violence, including witnesses of gun violence. When you go to some of these sessions and group meetings, the challenges of the people who are trying to communicate their feelings and their need for support is literally overwhelming. It is not easy to go through those meetings and not be touched or affected. Turning to the requests that we have, we request that CA adopt the proclamation, a draft of which I've just circulated, that declares the first Friday in June to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day in Columbia, to honor and remember all victims and survivors of gun violence, and to declare that we as a country must do more to end this public health crisis. Just some more background on the Survivors Network. There are really three groups that have overlapping memberships, but have three distinct roles and functions. One is the Survivor Network, which I just spoke to. The other is Be Smart, which focuses on tabling and attending events at schools and other public forum to stress the importance of secure gun storage, model and request and help people in modeling responsible use of firearms, and to recognize and understand the role of guns in suicide. That's Be Smart. The last group is the political group called Moms Demand Action. It's a public advocacy group. Howard County has a group. We are part of the Maryland chapter, which is part of the National Moms Demand Action. It is a very effective and persistent group, and it has had substantial success before the legislature. What I'd like to do, as requested last year, was to just go through the major decisions and laws that have been passed in the last 2 years by the state of Maryland. It's important to note that there was a Supreme Court decision in 2022 called New York State Rifles Association versus Bruin. And this is where the Supreme Court said you have to have a right. There is under the Second Amendment, individuals have a right to bear arms to protect themselves. It involved a concealed carry rule that applies in New York State, and it was a may issue statute. You had to make a special showing to secure a concealed carry permit, and that's what the Supreme Court struck down. In 2023, there were several major bills. One was the Gun Safety Act to expand the listing of sensitive locations where individuals with or without a gun license permit cannot carry guns. These were extended to private K-12 schools, community and four-year colleges and universities, healthcare facilities, and sports arenas. The district court did not agree and struck down under Bruin the presumption that guns cannot be brought onto private property, though individuals, owners of private property, can still prohibit guns on their sites. The others was Jalen's Law, which went to impose liability for leaving a firearm available to where a child could get access to it. And then there were amendments to the handgun licensing law, which has been appealed by the gun rights group. That's now in the Fourth Circuit, as is the longstanding Maryland assault weapons ban.
Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
I will circulate. I'm sorry I didn't get through 2024, but that was a very successful year as well.
Thank you. Next, we have Sharon Boyes representing Protect Our Streams. Sharon, are you out there? Can barely hear Sharon.
Only coming through on the one TV.
Just, wait, Sharon, just, we can, right now we can barely hear you in the boardroom. We're working on that. I think it's on our side. Sharon, try now. No, still can't hear you.
Hold on, Sharon.
We're working on this.
So sorry, sitting back.
It's my T-bone steak. Huh?
Nice medium rare, or what's that? That's good.
Medium well.
Medium well. That can tip over into being well.
Try again.
Hello?
There you
Yep,
go.
there's
Good evening. Uh-oh, now I'm getting an echo.
Good evening, Sharon. Well, we can hear you.
Okay, but I'm getting a real bad echo.
I'll turn this off.
Now it's fixed. Can we start my time over? Please? Can we please start?
Yeah, Alan's going to reset
Thank
the
you.
time. Thank you. Okay, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, board members, and thank you one last time to this board for your service and time and dedication to our community. I have several things tonight. We've been discussing transparency and inclusion and how to make the community feel like their thoughts count and that the residents' opinions matter. Now, I'm fully aware that I've communicated with 3 boards as much or more than anybody at this point, but I really spent a lot of time reading over and preparing 18 pages of comments on the new strategic plans that I submitted to each of you before the last board meeting. And in those comments was a 4-minute video that I asked for you to please watch when you had a chance and let me know your thoughts so I knew you had watched it. It wasn't a test. I really wanted you to see it. But you guys, if it were a test, not one single person responded to my email, much less my request. I sincerely hope that someone reaching out to you for the first time in the future isn't met with the same response. It's very difficult for some people to get up the nerve to reach out to you. This shouldn't be met with silence if they do. Regarding the consequences of the Longfellow stream restoration, the back-to-back rainfalls last week produced stunning results, and I don't mean that in a good way. If it was made super clear to anyone in this room that our mature forest would be turned into the Everglades with sideways flooding in 3-inch rainfalls, and you still thought this was a good idea to put people's yards and properties and possibly even homes at risk for flooding in the future, you honestly should be held accountable for making such a reckless mistake. Some of you approved of our stormwater absorbing forest being turned into a murky, flooded swamp. What if we get a hurricane? Who is going to take responsibility for removing the critical layer of protection for our neighborhood? Karen's proposed policy would have added much needed layers of protection, which brings me to the election. Changing my hats for a moment. Although Protect Our Streams does not consider itself or want to be seen as a political group in any way, I personally recognize that it is our elected officials on the local, county, state, and federal levels that have the ability to make the changes that are required to improve policies, regulations, and legislation that will have the largest impact on all of us. Therefore, speaking only for myself, I am asking anyone who is watching tonight to please be very sure of where the candidates for your village election stand before you vote. They might smile at you and seem folksy, but where do they really stand on the stewardship of our open space or our land use policy? Are they okay with stealing trees from the next generation? Do you want to elect a board member who supported the bulldozing of 65 acres of mature forest in our open space? And worse yet, if they say this is okay, so another neighborhood doesn't have to experience dredging as often, even though that isn't even true, there will always be dredging needed. To be clear, dams equal dredging, full stop. 100-year-old trees take 100 years to replace, also full stop. Do you want a board member who's cozy with the developers and may put those interests ahead of the residents? Should candidates and board members have to declare if they are paid or volunteer lobbyists for local corporations? Do you want a board member who seems anxious to rehash the anger and division we experienced during the Lakey era? I know I don't. Or should we vote for a more unified board and community in the future? Do you want a board member who worked to limit the ability for residents to speak out, or one who has pushed back in snarky ways on residents who have come to meetings to discuss very serious concerns? I am personally asking you to please be very clear on what your vision for our community, our open space, and our environment is before you cast your vote. But please vote. Finally, I have some incredible, great news to share. After years of requesting it, I am thrilled to report that Howard County has heard our concerns and requests and has included $500,000 in the 2025 budget for a Green Streets program. This is a huge step forward and one that Columbia should get in on. I want to thank the board members who also listened to our concerns on Lake Elkhorn and took action to protect our open space. Our community is very fortunate to have those members looking out for us and our environment, and I look forward to their hopeful return to continue the great progress we've made. We can't fall backwards now. We still have so much more to do. Thanks again for your time tonight and over the past year. And to the community, please vote, vote, vote like your wooded stream depends on it, because they do. Thank you. And thanks again for the service the past year.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
One.
Reg?
Yeah, hey Sharon, I missed what you said. Hey, I missed what you said about the $500,000. What was that for again?
Oh, for a Green Streets program. We've been, several members of Protect Our Streams has been requesting that the county include in their budget some funding for a Green Streets program. And I was informed that they actually have included $500,000 for the 2025 budget. They haven't said where yet, what neighborhood is going to get to, experience some of these projects, but it's just so exciting that they are acknowledging and working it in. And I hope it's just, a small drop in the bucket as to where we're headed. And I think it will be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great news.
Any further questions? I do have one quick question. What exactly makes a street a Green Street?
So the Green Streets program, it installs several, it's called BMP's Best Management Practices, to gather and collect and filter stormwater runoff pretty much where it's occurring, and definitely before it reaches the stream. So you'll see what's called like smart curbs that will direct stormwater runoff into like a bioswale, a grass swale that is planted up to absorb the stormwater before it reaches the storm drain. That's just one example. And I've sent a little leaflet out before, and I'd be more than happy to send one to you guys this evening as well. That describes it a good bit better with some pictures.
Thank you.
It's exciting. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you for testimony. Next we have Joel.
Thank you.
Joel Hurwitz. Joel, are you out there? Joel?
Evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for elevating me to panelist before your meeting began. The record, Joel Hurwitz, Vice Chair, Harper's Choice, but speaking only for myself tonight. First, regarding Bob Dover's comments, as I previously explained, the covenants of the 6 of the villages exclude CA's land from the covenants of the villages. Only 4 of them apply, apparently, for getting approval for trees. Not that you couldn't voluntarily submit to the other villages for advice. Regarding your work session meeting agenda item, on line 30, it says, for purposes of the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, a work session is still considered a meeting. So why do you keep arguing about not having minutes? On line 71, it says you're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order, except where you make a list on that page. Therefore, as I previously testified again, Robert says that you incorrectly use tabling when you mean to postpone to a certain time or postpone indefinitely. If you want to use tabling the way you do, you should make an exception for that. On line 75, you refer to the 10th edition. They're up to the 12th edition, so why are you still referring to the 10th edition? Page 4, line 60, says you can amend the agenda of a work session with a 2/3 vote. Again, where are you going to put that in the minutes? Line 72 says that you're going to have agendas for work sessions and meetings. And then in line 75, though, it only refers to meetings, not to work sessions. Though in many other places it says work sessions and meetings. But again, if a work session is a meeting and you actually treat it, you don't need all this. Contrary to what Alan and I discussed last night, Alan, that does not resolve the meeting problem with the old business, new business in line 75, 175, and 176. Also, as I previously dealt with your treatment of the villages, all basically the covenants of the villages say that we elect members to the Columbia Council and an incorporated association, the membership of which shall be composed of members of various associations in Columbia, which shall be approved by CA, said council in turn being entitled to nominate from its membership. Therefore, I again ask you to have a nomination meeting of the council before you do the electing by the members. And lastly, since SB 452 was the only bill that passed on your tracking list, I'd really like you to discuss in more detail the impact of the liability changes to CA's budget and risk management.
Thank you. Your time. Do we have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Last we have Dara Baker. Dara, are you?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. I am happy to be here. I have 3 things that I'm going to try to cover quickly in 3 minutes. First of all, I want to thank everyone for putting the changes to the easement policy on here. I have reviewed the documentation. I think it is a great improvement over what had existed before. I know that you're going to talk about it more during the work session, but I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Bob had said and really emphasize that I would like to see some more information in there, particularly about when the adjacent residents need to be notified, ensuring that, you work with the village boards that when they get the notification that they are required to send those notifications out, because there is nothing, the CA board sending the notification and it's sitting in somebody's inbox is not necessarily very helpful. And then the last is I think it would be really helpful, particularly for larger projects, to have a section on an estimate of the duration and the type of disruption. The second thing that I'd really like to address, and this comes out of my own experience being in the woods and walking the paths a lot, I think I was horrified this year at how much of the woods is covered by invasives. This is partly due to a report that had come out probably a couple of months ago about the health of forests in the U.S. and how many of them are actually in dire shape. They may look healthy, but the amount of ground cover and the types of invasives are actually strangling out the saplings in the trees. And so I'm out there and I'm looking at the Japanese honeysuckle that I've started calling strangleweed in my own head, and the English ivy, and a number of other climbing vines. And I would really like for the board to consider working with the staff going forward to establish that none of these vines that could escape your community should be planted in any village or residency going forward, and that we really should be working with the WACs to reframe them as invasive management committees, which really I've gone out with them and they do amazing work on that side to educate the community about pulling these out and doing more work to ensure that we can protect the forests. And then the last one is more of an invite for anybody who is unaware. The OMI Green Team is actually doing a Spring Green Fling on May 5th at the Interfaith Center. And I invite everyone to come. And if you are free and available, we are always welcoming volunteers to help us out. We'll be doing a number of events. There'll be some tables, and we're also going to be doing some giveaways. So thank you all very much for the board this year. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Bill.
Hey, hi, Dara. Bill Santos. Quick question. You said Interfaith Center. Which Interfaith Center in Columbia? Just so
I think it's the Oakland Mills.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Sky?
Yeah, thanks for your interest in invasive species. I believe we have one team member totally dedicated to that, Eric Walker, and I believe he has recently hired a new one or is in the process or has an opening. Just wanted everybody to know that. And I think it's also mentioned in the strategic plan for next year.
Thank you.
So adding a community voice to that as well is a yes, please, let's focus on that more.
Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes residents speak out for this evening. To limit interruptions during board discussion, all members of the general public will now be returned to the audience. This means you'll no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you're more than welcome to stay on as an attendee to watch the remainder of the work session. You can also watch a live stream on the CA live stream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. I will now take a moment to allow staff to make this transition, and we'll take a recess and be back in 10 minutes, so 20 of. Meeting. The first item on the work session agenda is the discussion of the proposed new strategic plan.
I've got just a couple of comments. So what I'd like to say is the strategic plan was revised based on comments we heard at the March 28th board meeting, as well as some follow-up from staff. We spent a lot of time and energy and reached out into the community. We didn't get exactly to where we wanted to get with it, but I think there's some good information in there. So my thought is let's hear how it changed, but assuming that we might end up tabling it, I think it would be a great way to start the May 8th retreat discussion as a place to start. And there's some of it that I'm sure people here like, some that they don't, but I think it'd be a great place to start rather than from scratch.
Okay. With that said, I'd basically like you to guide us through the significant changes between the last work session and today.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. So we had our last previous board meeting on March 28th, where we took your guys' feedback and incorporated what we heard back from the board. Also with the understanding that there is a potential opportunity to push this till the next fiscal year. So we took that into account and also added an additional section in the intro that talks about our kind of a North Star that we talked about last time, and I can let Michael elaborate a little bit on that in a moment here. But we also had a final review with the senior leadership team where they reviewed the document that incorporated the previous board's feedback. So we incorporated anything else heard back from the board. As far as any major changes, we took into account, the feedback that we heard back through the objectives and the actions. As far as the strategy and roadmap here, as far as the fifth bullet that you're seeing on the board, the technology is progressive to aid CA's growth. That was edited just a bit by Armsby at the IT level here by staff to focus on really utilizing technology to aid that growth. It's not necessarily the idea to be state-of-the-art or over-the-top progressive, but utilize that technology to aid CA's growth. And I'll hand it over to Michael here and Deepa. Michael, if you want to explain the North Star first.
Sure. So I think at most of the last recent meetings we've had, we focused on what we would call kind of the meat of the plan, which are the strategic focus areas and the goals, objectives, and actions, which we've revised in the recommendations. And we've spent a lot of time talking about those with you as well as with staff. And as I think we talked about earlier in the process, that a lot of those ideas, which we've talked about whether they're strategic or not, have come from all of the interviews, all the data collection, the survey, and all of the listening that we've done and discussions that we've had with you. So everything that's in this plan document from the original draft till now is stuff that's coming out of the community and your group and the staff. So there's nothing that we've created that is new. Now, we haven't spent as much time in these meetings talking about the front matter of the plan, which is like the introductory, the narrative, kind of explaining what's in the plan, et cetera. So I took a stab based on the conversations that we've had, and I've been listening very carefully to all of you and the various opinions here to see if we could define a North Star for you. And a North Star being like, what is that real outcome that we're seeking to get to, right, in a big picture way. And we've spent a lot of time, as you know, talking about mission and vision. And
what page are you referring to when just talking about the North Star?
Yeah, so I'm just giving you some context to where.
Give us a second.
Yeah, that is on
Page 6.
Yeah,
page 6. Yeah, page 6.
Thank you.
6 and 7.
Yeah, so I think maybe there's about a page worth of text. And so this was an attempt to kind of summarize, I think, where I would say we as the consultant team working with you in trying to define this. And I think that there's a few themes that emerged to us, and I think we've talked about all of these things, but trying to summarize them. One is that you did obviously you do these every 5 years, or attempt to, right? And you do a very good job of looking every year at the progress that's being made and reporting that out to the community. All of that information is on the website, right? And so from the very start, we had the parameters that you put forward out in the RFP that we built a work plan around, okay? So everything that we've done is based on the requirements that you set out. So I think one of the first things we heard from almost everybody was that we thought we had a really good plan last time, and then the pandemic happened, and that just turned everything upside down, which it did everywhere, right? And so what's happened in the time since things have gotten back to normal, whatever that is now, it's been kind of getting back to where we're trying to get to and understand, looking forward, what our lessons learned are from that and how can we kind of reshape. But I think you all have been in a little bit of flux, right? And we all have been. I've been, other organizations everywhere. So I think that's a key theme. And so this is the first plan that you've done post-pandemic, and there is obviously a very wide range of opinion about where you're at. And I'm not sure in all the conversations that we've had that I've heard, and I think we've heard, like one or two things that really say that's where that is, right? And so I think let's just acknowledge that and say, it's been a time of great change. You're also going to have a leadership change. There's, I guess, new board members coming on eventually. So there's just so much change, and I'm not sure that in listening to you that it's really clear right now what that North Star or vision is. But if we just acknowledge that, that's where we're at. And I don't think that that's, as a professional planner working with you, I don't think that that's a problem. I think maybe 5 years down the line or a year from down the line, maybe that will become more clear after there's a leadership change. I mean, there's so much has occurred here, and we've created this plan in a very short time frame amidst all of that. So the attempt in the North Star is just to acknowledge these things and say, whether you adopt this plan or not, I think we're very confident that you're going to use it. And if you do it again, you'll probably end up with something similar because, again, where are these ideas coming from? So that was just an attempt to acknowledge all of that and say this is where we think we're at. And we could change it, get your input to that, but I think that's a way to summarize everything we've heard.
Yeah, I think we got a couple of questions regarding the North Star. Karen?
Sure.
Yeah, I like the idea of the North Star, but I think you actually summed up where we are. We're in a time of transition, right? We're coming out of a pandemic, we're in a climate emergency, and we're undergoing a huge transition. So I actually think that's where we are right now, right? We're recovering from so much change. And in here, I mean, the very first sentence is, it's been a time of change and continuity. That seems a little contradictory. Can you kind of explain to me, like, when you guys came up with that sentence, what were you thinking of? Just so I understand it.
Sure. Well, any organization, and again, I'm looking at it from the outside, but I've worked in Columbia and I'm very familiar with the community and from the planning side and working with Howard County as planning office. We're not reinventing the wheel, right? There's a lot of change, but even if you want to change everything, a lot of things are going to carry forward. And so even though we started, if you recall the first work session we had, we said we're taking a clean slate look at this, but a lot of things are carrying forward, and we want to make sure that we're identifying those. So it's always going to be both, but the period of change certainly probably dominates at this point.
Okay.
Sky.
The comments I've received from people in the community are, the important thing, I think, in the table of contents is at the very end, how the strategic plan was created, the number of people that you interviewed, CA board, the SLT, the staff, the villages, and the community partners. And I'm just wondering if that should be up towards the top. Because it is so important and people would tend to skip it if it's at the end. And also the progress tracking and plan maintenance, I think that's crucial also. And that's fine at the end. But
Sure.
Any other questions?
Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a new section in the plan since our last meeting. So I guess there was discussion at the last meeting about the plan being tactical and not aspirational enough. And we as strategic planning consultants do a lot of plans and review a lot of strategic plans. So we went back to the drawing board and sort of tried to, to dig in a little more on where these comments were coming from and what your ideas were. And so our thought is, it's fine to have a high-level plan with lofty goals, but you also need a roadmap to sort of show you how to get there. And in looking at some of our strategic focus areas, which were, again, they became focus areas based on the conversations we had with you and the community and other stakeholders, that every one of these focus areas had some sort of a goal that is aspirational. So if you look at, for example, the ones that we pulled up were for Columbia to be a beacon of hope, for all to feel a sense of welcome and belonging, for social equity to be front and center in all efforts, for people to feel engaged through consistent communication, for environmental stewardship that is exceptional. So while we might be doing some of these things, we're not doing it all the time in the best way possible, and that itself is aspirational. And so we're looking at some of these high-level, big-picture items, and then we have a roadmap, which are the objectives, to sort of get us to that point. And like we mentioned, like Michael mentioned and Karen rightfully said, you are in a place of, it's in the middle of a lot of things going on. You're in the midst of change. But while this change is taking place, you have something in this plan, we think, to guide you and see you through the next few years when the new CEO comes in. So we look at this not as just a strategic plan, but also a strategic plan and roadmap to kind of take you to that direction. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know there was a little bit of discussion on, the plan is not aspirational. So these aspirations are, again, pulled from the strategic focus areas. Certainly, as you go along, we can add more aspirations, but for the time being, this is where we are as we come to the end of the planning process.
Alan?
Yeah, my understanding of the conversations that you're referring to, I think, was not that the plan, at least as I saw it, wasn't aspirational, it's that it included too many specifics that might change, that were more operational, that were in the CEO's bailiwick, not in the board's bailiwick. So, and this may end up sounding rude. I don't intend it to sound rude. I'm really trying to understand. Is this section that you're pointing us to your attempt to convince us that that's the best way to go, rather than to do what I thought we had talked about, which was to take some of that stuff out?
We have removed some of that. The specifics have been removed. The objectives the actions have been removed. Anything that's specific that denotes a number or a place or a certain time period has been removed, and we have generalized them to be more objective in nature.
Thank you.
They have been.
Any other questions on the roadmap? I do have one question. So when I look at these 6 bullets, you can make an argument that we're already here. The question is, how much of this have we already accomplished today, and where do we want to go? And what portion of this have we not accomplished?
So I would say, like, for example, the social equity. The DEIB is sort of, first of all, it's a new strategic area, and we have made that an important piece throughout the plan. It's strong, it's incorporated in all sections, in all of the other strategic focus areas, and it's a strategic focus area in and of itself. Now, while you are already doing some form of DEIB, we're not keeping it front and center as of now, and that is our hope. And that's what we want to achieve in this strategic plan.
Andy?
That's an example. And the same thing for environmental stewardship. I think being exceptional in that area is something that we are striving to. I think.
And I was thinking too that, sometimes progress is just making sure that you continue to do, let's say we've reached a certain level. Okay, it is very easy to fall back from that level. And so, maybe there isn't much more we can accomplish, let's say, to increase the level, but to maintain that level, to keep that, is just as important as trying to find some higher level or, more to do. Just look around. It's very easy to go backwards in organizations and cities. And sometimes maybe your goal is keep what we have and make sure that it still works and that we don't fall back. I mean, that's important too.
And we used a fine-tooth comb through each of the objectives to make sure that, if something is going well, we are saying we'll continue to do it. But for the most part, there are new actions and there are new objectives in there that are currently not, not taking place.
And as far as to address the bullets here, those align with the strategic focus areas, which also align with what Michael was saying earlier as far as continuity and change. Some things that we're doing right can carry forward, but if there's new things that we need to do, they're in here as well. So I wanted to just address that.
And in a strategic plan, there are always certain parts that we're continuing because we're not a new organization that's certainly starting to do something completely different. So what is being done and being done well continues, and then there are some new objectives that are taking place. So we kind of try to make sure that there's a combination of both.
Bill?
Just for a point of discussion and not trying to draw offense, but in listening to our residents speak out this evening, I think that's a direct challenge to the first 4 bullet points. I don't think that we've arrived anywhere near those first 4 if you listen to the people who spoke to us this evening. I think we got a lot of work to do. So that's just my opinion on it.
And certainly bring up the resident speak out, I agree with you. And the key question is, I guess the key question that I ask when we go through this process is, okay, we're here today, we need to be, where is there and how do we get there? Where is there that we need to get to? That's the key thing. So it's one thing to say, okay, continue doing what we're doing today, but if there are definite issues that we need to address, as you brought up, as residents have brought up, what can we do to address those strategically? That should be the guiding principle, I think.
Yeah, well, I think according to this list, the defining statement above the bullets is that our strategy is to get to a place where these are all realized, and that's the strategy. The tactics would be the how do you get there, right? I mean, that's what follows on.
I mean, the next step, it would be developing a tactical plan on how to get there.
I feel like this is a good first attempt, but I think that things are missing. So first of all, my constant concern is that the Columbia Association was created for the residents. And so I would really like to see a focus on residents. And that seems to be missing. And so where there should be a bullet in here, a model community where the greatest number of residents have the opportunity to participate in what Columbia offers. I mean, environmental stewardship to me is a good one to have on there. Program services and facilities operated in a fiscally responsible manner, but making sure that not just operating in a fiscally responsible manner, but that residents want to use what we have, because otherwise what's the point, right? So I feel like that is missing. Yeah, some of these things, obviously, like Andy said, these are things that we do. This is kind of like the sense of who we are. But I think we're missing the key component of why we even exist and what do we want to be for those people. So.
Any further questions or comments on the roadmap? Did you want to respond to Karen's comment?
So we did take into account your comment, and we went back and we changed a few, those two, from community to residents, where we felt it was appropriate, right?
Yeah, I can say Yeah, so that was one term that was a bit back and forth between the board and the senior leadership team. Through different reviews, we, on both sides completely agree that residences should be community and plan for the residents as well. And we took into account your previous comments on those residents. And then going back in front of the SLT, there were several comments to use the word community as more overarching rather than residents.
So my only comment back to you would be residents pay 60% of the revenue that we take in annually. They are the stars of the show. We, as a 501c4, we have to share we can't restrict anything. We have to share it with everybody. But the driving reason that we even exist is because of the residents.
So while we talk, just so I understand, when we talk about services that are offered to beyond residents, those were areas where we felt it was important to include community, because there are folks, for example, somebody like me that uses CA and its facilities, but I'm not a resident of CA. I live right outside Columbia. So there are, in that scenario, so I just want to get.
We want you to use our facilities. We want you to feel welcome here. But the residents are the ones subsidizing all of those facilities. They wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the residents. So we're very glad to have you. Thank you for being a member. But at the same time, it's these facilities and everything were created for the residents. We make sure that they're available to everyone.
Sky.
To me, residents are people who live here. And maybe we need to define those terms, the difference between residents, homeowners, and community. And some of them overlap. So residents would live on CA-assessed property and non-CA-assessed property, and residents would include homeowners and renters.
So I believe when Karen's referring to resident, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is people that are living on CA-assessed property, whether they're renters or homeowners?
Anyone who is paying the assessment, Susan will correct me if I get this wrong, anyone who is paying the assessment is considered a resident. That means if you own properties and rent them out, you're still considered a resident. If you work in Columbia on a commercial property, on CA property, you are considered a resident. You get all the same benefits as someone who is a homeowner. So residents, to me, are those people who live on assessed property or pay the assessment, or the people who work here. Those are the people that I'm thinking about when I talk about residents. Did I get anything wrong?
I don't really know.
And I still think if that's the understanding that we have to define the terms, because the average person reading this would think a resident is somebody who resides and that is somebody who lives. So a business would not be a resident to them.
Any further questions? So I think we can go into the next, Andy.
I think Karen and Sky brought up a really good point, though, that we may be using the term residents in a different way that if you just went out in the community and said resident, they're going to get a different picture. And because we do this, I think Sky's right, that we probably do need to have just somewhere in there at the beginning to say, in this document, a resident, just so that people don't get, an incorrect.
I get what you're saying.
Read that.
But that's what it says in our charter and bylaws.
Yes, right.
Right, it says residents, it doesn't say.
Yes.
It doesn't say not you, not you. It doesn't, right?
But it's just when, you talk, as you said, you just talk to someone who hasn't read our charter, they may have a very different view they may have a more restricted view of resident. Some of them may just think in terms of you have to own property,
Reg then Bill. Reg?
Thank you. So as I'm looking at this, I can't help but thinking, when I first heard the term resident in reference to this, my idea of resident was someone who owned property, a house or a condo or apartment or something like that. That's what I really considered a resident. So now I'm kind of readjusting my definition of what a resident is. And I believe we do need to spell it out and say, when we, as Andy said, somewhere in the document, state, this is what for this document, this is what a resident is. So it's clear, everybody understands the term and how it's being used.
Yep, absolutely. We'll go back and add a section in there with some definitions.
Bill?
I thank you for developing action items. I think this is one that falls to the board, and the board needs to sit down and come up with a definition of what this greater grouping of people, residents, community, people of Columbia, whatever we're going to call the folks that this strategic plan is supposed to address. This board needs to make that definition clear for the consultant to use and make sure that it's durable enough to stand up for 5 years. And that's on us to figure out. We're kind of making word definitions as we go along here, and that's not good for anybody. We need to have a meeting. We need to discuss and decide this, and then communicate that in order to go forward. Anything else would be a disservice to the process.
Well, whatever definition we come up with, it needs to be consistent with whatever's in our charter and bylaws.
And the IRS.
And state and local and federal legislation also.
Yeah.
I assume that goes without saying. Okay, so is there any more comments on the strategy and roadmap?
So in terms of next steps, we have our final meeting on the 25th. So between now and then, we'll make the edits that we've discussed so far.
So the next step.
Just one quick comment. I just want to say that this is a strategic plan. It is not a legal document. It is not legally binding. It's a strategic plan. We don't have to adhere to the charter definition in order to come up with a plan that is coherent and readable. We just need to be consistent and make sure people understand what we're talking about. So I just want to make that comment. Thanks.
Fair enough. Andy?
I do want to thank you. You did clean up the objectives, and I think you did a fairly good job in it. They read much better, and I think they flow much better. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So any other comments on this section?
Well, just to summarize, I just would like to thank you on behalf of our team as well. This is not an easy process, and we could work endlessly to kind of wordsmith everything. So I think all the conversations have been really useful for me, and I think for us to help us focus. And what we're trying to do is work with you to get the document to where you need it to be. So I think tonight's conversation and adding that section, absolutely important, and then highlighting that, because that, if you do ultimately adopt this and it goes out there, then it should be clear. And then when people come back to you and ask you what, you can refer back to it, and we can work with you to get that to that point. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And I think, as Michael said, whether the plan is adopted right now or not, I think the plan will still be a useful document. And the last 5 months, it has been, the schedule has been compressed, but I think we are overwhelmed with the level of participation, whether it's been from the SLT or the interviews or the board, the several meetings. And I do want to say, as consultants, we grow thick-skinned, so things don't, we don't take things to heart. But just the back and forth, for us, it was a learning process too. So we really appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you. Do board members have any final comments on the strategic plan? Okay, so this would be on the agenda for a vote in 2 weeks at the final meeting of the year. Do you have a comment?
I was going to talk about the next item.
Oh, okay. So that brings us to the CA easement policy.
So before Jeremy gets started, I'd like to say a few words. So we've heard from the board, we've heard from residents, we've heard from the village, we've heard from the community, we've heard from a lot of people about the easement policy, and we've listened. And, should we reinforce the notification process? Yes. Should we provide a more fulsome request form? Yes. Should we provide an estimated completion date? And I just heard that tonight, and I'd say yes, and thank you, Dara. And should we provide maybe an estimated start date? Yes. Do we need to reinvent the policy? No. The board already has all the authority it needs to address any of the issues that have come up. And by using, and not every easement is exactly the same. Some are for 10 feet of sanitary sewer or for stormwater, and some are for 4 miles of stream restoration. Not everything is the same. If the staff presents the easement request form to the board with all the information about notification and the limits of disturbance and the community impacts, the board at that time for an individual easement can ask for additional information. As a body, the board can vote together and that information would be forthcoming, or ultimately the easement would not be approved. Staff does not approve easements. We bring information to you. If there's more to be done, we'll do that. But not every easement is the same, and we don't need to reinvent the policy.
Thanks.
Karen.
Dennis, can the staff change the application without coming to the board?
Change the application form?
So yeah, you're giving us a new easement request form. Are you able to change that form without coming to the board?
We just did.
Yeah.
I think it's a living document.
What I'm saying is, you were saying you don't want to update the policy, but you can change this easement request form at any time without ever coming to the board.
This is not part of the policy. The board has absolute authority to approve the easements and request any additional arrangement. Because honestly, I didn't think about the estimated completion date, and that's not in here. But that's a great question. There might be something else that comes up at a easement discussion that's not part of this, or something we thought of that the board can bring to staff's attention and can become part of the discussion.
We let staff do their presentation first, and then we did ask them to bring back something.
I understand. I just got a question, so I put Karen in the queue.
Guys had their hands up.
Guys got her hand up also.
Jeremy, when you speak tonight, are you going to speak to the current way of doing things and the current forms, or the comments that you've put together to improve them already?
Sure. So it's sort of a hybrid. It's sort of a brief recap of the policy as it stands and some of the guiding documents and how it works, just to make sure everybody's clear, and the significant amount of work that CA undertakes with each of these easements currently. It juxtapositions, the current process as well as the enhancements that we're making, and then it sort of closes with a summary of the latest piece, which is the additional application form that we've expanded from a single, a single page to now 4 pages, with a significant increase in level of detail to be provided to the board about each of these requests.
Alan, did you have a question?
I just want to, more make a point before.
We can hear you.
And Dennis, I just want to make sure that the board are not the experts. The board relies on the staff to bring the information we need. And so I guess, I just want to, my expectation would be that all those pieces that you mentioned, including the ones that you just thought of today, would be part of what the staff brings to the board. My concern would be, and yes, the board can always say, hey, wait a minute, I need something else, but the board doesn't have boards change, boards don't remember what was said. I just want to be assured that we're going to get all that information that we've talked about.
The answer is yes. So can I answer that in a little more detail? So for instance, the notification process. Should that notification process be an individually posted letter to each resident in an apartment complex? That would be in the form. And yes, we would make that recommendation, and you'd say, well, that's not enough. You should spread out and do the entire village or something like that. But we'd start with the recommendation and bring that information back to you, and then you would, if you needed to, make adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
All right, excellent. So just to review, so in terms of the easement process, it's a rigorous multi-phase process. It adheres to the 2008 easement policy, the key term being desirable and beneficial for the social welfare of the people of Columbia, right? Like that's the crux of the entire process going forward.
We actively engage with the project applicants team, like we're with them for sometimes years. Members of our staff collaborate with them from the start of the easement process all the way to completion and final inspection. And again, that can be 3 or 4 years. It's an internal departmental review, so basically it's a coordination between our OGC's office as well as our internal subject matter experts from capital improvements, open space, sustainability. So it's a collective group within community operations to review and approve all of these.
I do have one, could you go back a second?
Yeah.
I do have one question on the procedures of transaction of CA property, item 2 at the very bottom. CA shall obtain an appraisal if deemed necessary. Who gets to deem it necessary? Is that the board decision? Is that a staff decision? Who deems whether or not the appraisal is necessary?
I think as a rule of thumb, we always get one based on the adjacent property value. That's sort of our standard practice now because it's so difficult to assess the value of open space property. We use the adjacent property, whatever is being developed, as a standard.
Karen.
Alan had his hand up first.
While we're on this slide, could you just say a couple of words about, let me just make a statement, then ask a question. Over the years, and it's not about you, there have been times where I've seen that desire and benefit from the social welfare, and it's felt like boilerplate that we had to put in there because otherwise we can't do something, but we just put it in there. What are some ways that you evaluate that? And do you have any examples where you said to somebody, that doesn't measure up to that?
I don't have any examples of ones that we've rejected offhand, just because this is something relatively new for me in terms of my scope of responsibility within CA. But as a rule, approximately 75% of the easements that we process, at least over the last 4 years, are public works related. So it's a sanitary sewer, it's a stormwater maintenance easement for Howard County. So in many cases, they're relatively simple and straightforward and very clearly a public good.
Karen?
Thank you.
Yeah, so the current policy does require, or says that you need to get an evaluation if desired. I think that's in the current language.
Professional appraisal.
Yeah, but we allow staff to do that. We allow staff to do it. We don't get an independent evaluation of what it is we're trying to do. We rely on staff to do exactly what Jeremy said. And I don't think that that is sufficient anymore. I think that we really need to understand what it is that we're doing. And Bob Dover sent us exactly how we get those independent evaluations after our meeting a couple months back when we first brought up this topic. So it's a very easy thing to have done. It's not challenging. And if we don't put all of this in a policy, if we just say, oh, the board can do whatever it wants, that's true, the board can do whatever it wants. However, if we have it in a policy, it ensures that the board actually does ask for that information. It's never just left to, hopefully, we have a very aware board. This board changes. Every year we get new board members. So, and every year everybody has to be brought up to speed on what's happening and how things work. And if we don't have this in a policy, if we don't put that we want the notifications in there, if we don't put that we want the independent evaluation, and we should do exception language. I shared with the board that I met with Brian Schepter and Joseph Capebbi this week and asked them specifically what their concerns were after they sent us that letter, and Emily, after they sent us their letter. And they really just need exception language for what Jeremy just spoke about, which is the sewers and things like that. And I think we can very easily take that policy that I wrote, we can write the exception language in there, and it would make it very easy for them. So if that's the majority of them, that's great. And then with making sure that stream restorations are not included in that exception language, and I think that we should update the policy. I don't think we need a new process. I think the board needs to put in a new policy for not just ourselves, not just for CA, but for future boards to make it easier on them as well, to make sure that we're getting all the information that we need.
Dennis, did you want to?
So in terms of the social welfare, I have a couple of examples. So there was the applicant who wanted to subdivide his lot and needed an easement to put a driveway in. And that was it. He just wanted the easement. And we said, no, that's not enough. And the property in its entirety would have to be put under the annual charge. There was development at, I think it's Shaker in Guilford, the 10 or 15 or 20 townhouses or whatever they are. They wanted to connect to our pathway. to fulfill an obligation they had for the SDP, but, and that was what they wanted the easement for, and that was the extent of it. And no, that wasn't enough. So we have had cases where we've turned it down. Now, in both those cases, I told the applicant I would recommend it against it, which I did, but you can bring it to the board, which they did, which the board then turned down, which they subsequently, at least one, put it under the annual charge. In terms of the valuation, that is on the easement request form. And if the board as a body for each individual, so for a sewer easement, no, for maybe for the driveway, maybe yes or no. But the board as a group can vote whether they want an independent appraisal or not.
Bill and Sky.
Just a quick question. I was not at the last meeting that we held. Did the board authorize Karen to negotiate with the county with respect to a policy that's under review?
I don't see any negotiations.
This wasn't a negotiation, Bill.
The answer to your question is no.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we were
Can I
there.
just say something? First of all, I wasn't going there to talk for the board or in any way speak for the board, Bill. I went there because they sent us a letter. They said they had specific concerns. They reached out to me to ask if I would meet with them, and I said yes, because I wanted to find out what their concerns were. And I shared it with everybody in an email, so you've known for several days now that I met with them. And so that you're just now raising this, I find very confusing. Do you not want to solve this problem for the residents? Because we have stream restorations that have been upsetting people for over a year now, and it sounds to me like you don't actually want to solve this problem. You'd rather just get on your soapbox.
Oh, no, I would certainly like to solve this problem, but I don't need people acting for the board when
I did not act for the board. I went and asked questions. I just told you I did not act for the board.
Okay. I think Sky wants to get on. Sky?
Yeah, it's my understanding at the last meeting that we turned the evaluation of this policy over to Dennis, who would then turn it to legal or whoever was doing evaluation of all the policies since last October. I was surprised then that you met with the county. It would have been great if you had asked some of us to come with you. And it's also my understanding that the purpose of a board packet is to give us advance notice of what's going to be discussed so that we would have some information. And you missed the deadline to be included in the board packet. Therefore, your report did not go out to the community, so we couldn't get any community input. And back to the original question, it's my understanding that the staff are more expert than the board is, and the staff, the term "if necessary" tells the staff, use your best judgment based on your skills, knowledge, expertise, experience, and if you think it's necessary to go and get further evaluations, do it. If you don't, that's fine. The board would then make the same determination if the board thinks it needs to go to an independent person. So it doesn't just stop with the staff. The board can add additional requirements of the staff for every application.
I'll let Karen respond if she wants because it was
I don't need to
directed at her.
respond. I don't need to respond.
Okay. Andy?
Could we possibly let Jeremy finish? Because I really would like to hear what the staff is proposing. I mean, I see a little bit, but I really would like to hear.
Okay, I'd just like to add in terms of the assessment. So we use the State Department of Assessments and Taxation's property assessment as our baseline. So that is our neutral body that provides that valuations, and it's widely utilized, and it's a great resource because it's standard. There's no subjectivity to it in terms of one appraiser being different than another one. It's the state's assessment of the property. I just wanted to follow up on that.
So one comment I'll make is, SDAT assesses the value of the property. And I assume in some cases you might have to use adjacent properties as surrogates if we don't have an open space assessment. But that's just an assessment of the property. It's not necessarily an assessment of the easement. So I think those are two different things. So an easement could have a very different value than the property. For example, you could have a property that's not worth much, but if someone wants to put a football stadium on there, now that easement is worth a lot of money, even though the property itself isn't worth much. So I think there's, I think this is a good step, but this is not necessarily representative of the value of the easement.
Sure, but as a rule, the easement area is essentially, as we've already talked about, 75% of them, it's a small little piece of land for a sewer. So whatever the valuation is, it's multiplied by a very small amount of square footage relative to what's happening at the mall or at Lakefront North.
Yeah, I understand that 75% of easements are pretty straightforward. It's the other 25 that keep us up at night.
Sure.
Bill?
Just as I think it's actually like 635 to 4, right? It's not 20%. Right?
I'm just using
Real
Jeremy's
numbers.
number. If he wants to come up with another number, I won't argue it. I was just using his number. You can continue, though.
Sure, well, those are public easements with Howard County, typically, or the state of Maryland. Yeah. Okay. So just to walk through the process again in terms of the phasing, there's a pre-submission meeting with the applicant. We review documents, the village manager is notified. We do the fee assessment calculations. Then phase 2 is really where a lot of work happens. It's the multi-year process where we're actively a part of the team. For example, with Howard Hughes and Lakefront North, there are regular coordination meetings with them as that process evolves over time, again, over years of time. And then phase 3 is the actual construction phase, and there's another notification component that happens along with that, as well as any post-inspections associated with that work to make sure that our standards are met around any remediation work associated with open space. So in a sewer project, for example, that would be making sure that that small area where the sewer went in was remediated and returned back to our standards for open space. So this is just sort of just a summary of the notification components that were in the current process in terms of the village manager notified by the applicant. It's in the CA board packets, throughout the process through the 2 meeting rules. Then phase 3 is so this is an example letter. Again, this is a sewer project that happened in River Hills. This is a small development property. So this is a letter that the applicant was required to submit before they started construction to the village, notifying them that work was about to start. And then typically with the larger development projects where we may be a tiny, very infinitesimal aspect of that project, there is a tremendous amount of public notification happening associated with anything that goes through DPZ and their planning process and their zoning process. So there's typically a tremendous amount of public notification that's happening in parallel with our work associated with larger projects.
Just so I'm clear, residents only get notified after it's been approved.
Well, so the village manager is notified in phase 1 that the application is coming, then it's in the public documentation associated with the board packet.
Affected residents, the neighbors, the whoever, only get notified after the board has approved the easement.
Yes, in terms of direct contact, yes.
And do we think that's best practice?
Well, I'm about to get into our improvements to enhance that practice.
Going back over the old.
This is a historical practice. Okay. Yes, exactly. This is sort of the current practice.
That's pre-submission.
So in terms of concerns that we've heard and have been raised by the public and by the board, so typically I've binned them here into 4 categories. So it's community notification, village board notification, the public welfare of the people of Columbia, the justification, and then the actual details that are provided to the board to make that decision. So we sort of talked a little bit about the current practices, but in terms of the enhancement, so in terms of the village manager, we've added now that the village board chair must be notified by the applicant as well. We're going to be tracking that actively to make sure that communication is made and that they've requested a presentation to the village board. We can't control what the village boards do, but we can make sure that the applicant asks to get on the village board agenda. And then that notification is tracked by staff. In terms of further public notification, so I've talked about this sign a little bit. This is on the, presented this at the last meeting. So we've added a component to this now, again, further responding to concerns about direct notification. So the process going forward would be that letters will be mailed to adjacent property owners at the time of the application, as well as the signage posted in open space associated with the project. There's a QR code on here. Well, we've had really great success with communicating with the community using QR codes where folks are out there with their phones and they can pick it up and hit a link and go right to our website and get some information. So we've already added this page to our Real Estate Services website where they can see any pending easement requests that are in the pipeline, so they can get the details and then follow up with staff for any questions that way.
And quick question, when would those go out? I mean, those would obviously go out before the easement comes to the board for.
Correct. As soon as we're aware that it's coming, the signs would go up. Yeah.
It comes at submission. They would go
Yes.
at submission.
Exactly. Yes, that's correct. And then in terms of further details for justification, the public welfare of the people of Columbia, really expanding upon some of the details in the assessment that staff makes around some of the guiding principles that are associated with our operations, such as public access, environmental stewardship, neighborhood and destination, community facilities and services. And then this is sort of an additional enhancement that was in the current board packet in terms of providing additional level of detail to the board associated with what the application is and what the project means for the community. And so we can sort of, the cover page is some of the additional details. I love the idea of the project duration. I think some of that is in flux because of the nature of larger scale construction projects at the early phase. So I think we can figure out how to most effectively integrate this piece of information into the public knowledge, because again, these projects can take years before they break ground. And so that's something we can look at, but I really like the idea as well as the duration for the people of Columbia. And then the estimated completion date. That was the other piece of data that I found very useful that Dennis mentioned. Again, so that's the value in this being a living document. So we can continue to make improvements as needed. So the second page gets into, and this is in the board packet, so I won't sort of roll through it here on the presentation, but this is where we provide the additional details and checkboxes for what aspects of the public welfare we feel this project supports in terms of public access, safety improvements, and then some additional details about staff's analysis that was conducted to support this. Yeah, Alan?
Something I never thought of before, based on what you just said. When does an easement start? Now, is it somebody wants an easement to do something under one of our pathways? Do they have that easement from the time we grant it until whenever they do it? Because what if we just changed our minds and wanted to do something with that land that would make their thing problematic, but they're taking years to do what they want? Does that easement tie us up from the moment we grant it?
Well, it varies easement by easement, and typically once the easement is approved, there is, again, I mentioned phase two. So phase two is where the details of the easement really come into play in terms of how that project evolves with permitting when they're negotiating with the county in terms of what the actual final project looks like. And then it gets really into the details around the surveying and exactly what the area is that's impacted in principle. But as a rule, the easements that are executed, especially the public ones, are perpetual, especially for the sewers. Yeah, but in many cases, in recent years, we've started to add clauses to them that they expire or they are rescinded if the project as proposed does not go forward.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the second page on the enhanced application process for the board is sort of the checklist around the social welfare benefits to the people of Columbia as it aligns with our guiding principles, as well as community benefits. Some additional details around alternatives, the termination clause I just mentioned, as well as any related larger scale information that will be available at the county through DPZ. Again, for example, Lakefront North is a colossal project. There's a tremendous amount of work that's going on with DPZ in terms of public communications associated with that. I think the other big piece in here, which I think is fantastic improvement, is the recordation of the notification steps that have been taken, the checkbox process and dates associated with that. So when was the village manager known? When did the signage go up? When was there a public meeting held? When do the mailings go out to the community? So getting those details into this application process for the board, so the board has assurances that these steps have been taken to make sure the community is aware of this project. And then the last page is basically sort of our summary recommendation for approval or whatever it may be.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Does the board have any questions? Sky?
I think this is great. Does any of this fall under a change in policy, or is it just a change in the details of how you operate this function?
Right, it's just a change in the implementation of the existing policy, an enhancement to our implementation, to staff's implementation of the existing board-approved policy.
Any other comments? Bill and Karen.
I just wanted to jump off, with respect to the staff reports, I downloaded a copy of a publicly available technical staff report from the planning board, and I'd like to pass it out because I think it's got some useful information. I got copies for everybody. Just if I could have 5 minutes. This is used by the Department of Planning and Zoning for all review of all approvals by the planning board. It's scalable. This is a particular one from last December. It's 4 houses in a residential environmental design setting. But this is the same format that they used for Lakefront North for the 700 units down there. It's more than 3 pages for that one, but it's certainly scalable. And there are some great features that are here that I think we could borrow from as far as, if you just look at the front. Quick statement of the request of what the easement would be for us. It's for the actual development on this page. A proper location description of where it is and a map so that everybody can understand that's there. Jeremy has that up in his already. I like the idea on page 2, the description of the vicinal properties, the properties adjacent to the subject property. That discussion or that description I think would be fantastic for the board in reviewing. They have a section here for legal notice. I think just a notice for us where the signs were posted, who was mailed, that kind of thing. Any regulatory compliance. The general information section, part 1 here, which is a history of what the lot has been used for, and then at the very end, the proposed site improvements, which would be the easement that would be for under consideration by this board. Section 2, specific planning board criteria for this particular zoning regulation. There are 3 things that people need to look at as zoning or planning board members in order to approve, disapprove, or approve with modification. And they lay out each one of these criteria, and then they provide a little explanation as to how they feel that criteria has or has not been met by the applicant. This is just a reference. This is not a statement of yes or no. It's something for everybody to evaluate. I think that would be valuable to a board that had to take a look at an easement. And then at the bottom, any additional regulatory requirements that needed to be met associated with this subject property. I think that any additional requirements that would have to be met for the easement, what other approvals would have to be done after the easement or permission is granted before anything was realized, whether that was permitting, whether that was zoning, whether that was environmental. It would be important for people to know going forward what other things need to be met before this would actually start shovels in the ground. Just to wrap up really quick, this is a real quick read, and it's kind of got some really important aspects, I think, that if we were going to evaluate easements going forward, we're talking about communicating properly and having the right information. They've been doing this for decades, and it seems to be a very nice way to concisely deliver to decision makers what the parameters are, and it's a great start. It's not perfect for us, but I think we should really consider looking at this in detail.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. I think this looks really interesting, and so I just want to really thank you for bringing this to our attention. Yep. The comment I have is, and before we go down the rabbit hole of looking at forms and approving forms, the board doesn't approve forms. The board sets policy, so I think the question in our minds needs to be, how does this translate into strategic policy that the board should consider?
Yeah, well, it doesn't necessarily directly, but I think that having this as a discussion to say, this looks kind of nice, it's nice to communicate that to staff and see if we can realize some of this. I mean, earlier we had a resident say, hey, a start date and end date, a duration. That seems to be picked up and something that would be included. If we were to say, hey, we like some of these elements as a board, that could also be picked up by staff as a signal that, hey, this is something they'd like to see in front of them. That would give them confidence in evaluating the viability of an easement proposal.
Sky, then Karen.
I think the most important thing here is Section 2, the planning board criteria. I've had years of experience with ACs and RACs and planning boards and zoning boards, and it is so easy to get sidetracked when people are testifying that I think these three items that help the organization focus the information that they're given in order to prove that they made a certain decision based on criteria. I think that's very important.
Karen?
Yeah, I think this is very helpful. I'm glad Bill brought it, and I hope that the staff will take it and see what they can adopt. But what I like the best is this is in accordance with section 107.g.0.1 and 2 of the zoning regulations. And that's what we're talking about here tonight, our own form of regulations, which is board policy. And so we need to have a policy that these things are based off of, and the existing policy is not sufficient. And we need to talk about updating the policy. And I feel that that's been lost over the last many meetings, is that at the heart of all of this is we have a policy that doesn't work any longer and needs to be updated.
Andy?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I did a quick look, and I did a quick look with Jeremy's. I think an awful lot of this information is captured in Jeremy's form, which I think, flows very well. But yeah, I read the technical staff reports all the time for the projects, so, yeah, but I think it's got a lot of good things in, and I like the form that Jeremy came up. I like all the additional information. I like the fact of the public notice, the fact of the expansion on the criteria for, why is this the betterment, which is kind of like your section, does it meet the criteria? Yeah, well, our criteria is, does it fall in, is it a public improvement, is it pedestrian, that type of thing. So it matches, I think, very well. But I do think that some good ideas.
So we're close to the end of time. I do want to quickly second Sky's point on that. I also really like the criteria section of this plan. I think it definitely helps focus. Yeah. But I think one of the things that I noticed just reading this is these are a lot more specific than our own criteria in our policy.
Well, I was just going to state that we were talking about the social betterment criteria that we have. The first criteria here is wide open. Proposed layout of lots and open space effectively protects environmental and historic resources. You could write all kinds of things, big and small, about that. So they struggle with this too. I know that for a fact. But all criteria are good or bad or somewhere in the middle, and you work with them. That's why they're criteria.
Yeah, I'd say this is actually more specific than general social betterment. Yeah. With that,
I have a quick question.
Quick question?
Yeah. I think Bill made the recommendation a while back that the board members go and visit the sites, and I'm just wondering if, in your opinion, that would be beneficial or not. And you don't have to answer tonight.
I think, as I mentioned, some of them are fairly benign in nature, right? It's a 10-foot sewer easement somewhere. But I think we could make it a part of this process where staff would elevate certain projects or maybe add another checkbox. We would recommend a tour. Staff will coordinate with the board around setting up a date that meets most people's schedules. I think that could be something we can add if the board would find that valuable.
Okay, thanks.
I would just like to quickly note this is a team effort. So Jason here and Brady Greer, who's actually watching as well, have been really instrumental over the last couple of weeks in developing all of this new content for the board.
Thank you.
Work makes the dream work.
Thank you. That brings us to item 4C, the play area policy.
Okay.
Is there a presentation?
We weren't going to repeat the presentation from the last board meeting, and it's really an opportunity for the board to discuss and ask questions.
Okay. So with that, I will open it up to the board to ask questions on the cluster play area policy, and also behind that is the cluster play area program guidance. Andy.
Yeah, just a couple things. One of the residents of my village had sent an email to the board with a couple of, I thought, very good suggestions, which I wanted to bring up. But so when we do the considerations under the program guidance, can we add shade as a thing to think about? Because it's getting more and more. I mean, shade can be a tree or it could be a shade structure, but I just think, specifying that we should at least look at shade as a consideration. I think also we should include county play areas when we do isochrones, because sometimes they're very close, and why should we duplicate services like that? So I just think at least identifying them so the village is aware of it and we know that it's all in the isochrome, because I think that's important. I think you should consider adding a meadow to the list of response items, repurposing items when you think about maybe a lot isn't good enough, because I do remember our open space report had said that one of the things that Columbia was lacking was meadows, that we are sufficiently deficient, sorry, I'll get it right one of these days, in meadows. And so, now meadows are not grass fields, okay? They're meadows. They're natural Maryland plant meadows types, but I just think consider adding that. And then for the destination play areas, there was a little thing about parking, and I just think that we should require that parking is already available. We're not constructing parking lots for these play areas. We don't want to do that. We don't want to use I don't want to convert some of my open space to parking lots just because we're building a big play area. If the area doesn't have sufficient parking, because we really want these things to be walkable, I think we should consider that into the request if it's going to be a destination play area. That I don't really want to get into building parking lots as part of our tot lot policy. So those are just some of the comments I have.
Karen?
Yeah, Andy, those are good comments, but when it comes to so I think, Jason, I think that when we did the pilot, when we did the isochrones, we did consider whether there were Howard County playgrounds nearby and making sure that we weren't duplicating, but maybe it's not written in here and I just missed that. So I think that was one thing. Do you want to respond?
Yes, so we included Howard County play areas that are open to the public. Now, Howard County Public Schools, their policy is that their play areas are not open to the public. Now, we keep those in mind, but we can't actually use those in making our decisions when we're doing the isochrones.
And then the other thing is parking, Andy. I think that when we talked about, and Jason helped me here too, I think we talked about destination players. Were we talking about like something grand? I think we also said that we want each neighborhood to have something unique when we thought through, and there would always be a presentation to the village, so if parking and stuff like that was required. I can't remember though, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, most of the destination tot lots are already built. Most villages, I should say, have them in place.
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking of, on Stevens Forest Road, we'll have what I think is the destination play area, but it's located directly next to the elementary school and our pool, and so it already has the parking. So it's like, yes, that's a great place to put a destination play area because I can piggyback on things. Whereas we built a destination play area in Dorsey, which is a nice one, but we did not add parking. That was really, if you want to use it, you kind of have to walk or park along the street. So that's just some of the things I was thinking about in terms of, once again, I just don't want us to think that we're going to build a parking lot as part of a destination play area.
Yes, that was not the intent.
Any other, Reg?
Yeah, quick question actually for Andy. So you have this parking destination. How well used was it? I mean, was it used a lot? Or?
Oh, well, so, I mean, I'm thinking of, in my mind, I can think of 3 play destination areas. One is Lake Elkhorn. And that is very heavily used. Now, it is used both by people walking in the surrounding community, but it is also used by people who go to the lake, but we have parking there for the dock area and on the street, so it's good. The Stevens Forest one, I think, is very heavily used, and I believe that that's an ADA compliant one.
It is.
So once again, it's used by people who come to the pool, Park Elementary School.
So there's another reason to go there.
Right. And then the third one in Dorsey, I'd probably refer to Chris, maybe he might know more. I know where it is. It's a nice area, but I'm not that familiar with how many people use it.
It's adjacent to the Dorsey Neighborhood Center and Pool, which if it's not high season for the pool, there's a ton of parking there. If it's in the middle of the summer, parking is pretty sparse. The one in Faulkner Ridge is next to the pool also, and the Faulkner Ridge Center is not used right now, so there's a ton of parking right next to that one. And then Jeffers Hill, there you got the destination playground behind the pool. You got the playground next to the neighborhood center. You got the playground at the elementary school.
Right.
And I think there's a fourth playground there too. So you guys
close by.
And that's Playground Central. That's a great place.
And there's also Hawthorne in Hickory Ridge that has the playground, a couple playgrounds right next to the pool, and there's a whole bunch of parking for both.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the parking is supporting multiple amenities. It's not just for the tot lot, it's also for pools and other amenities in the vicinity. So I think the key point that Andy is trying to make is we're not going to build a playground and then build its own parking. It would basically be leveraging off of existing parking. A couple comments I have is one, just reading the cluster play area policy, a lot of it's duplicative of the cluster play area program guidance. So my suggestion is let's just keep the cluster play area program guidance, make that the policy, and put everything in here, because I think this is a really good guidance, and this I think could be just the policy.
Well, I think part of the intent is for the program guidance to be sort of a living document to reflect changes in play area types, safety requirements, community preferences. So I think we envision this as the implementation tool that staff use to implement the board-approved policy. And this could be flexible without requiring a significant board action to change any one word in here.
Any comments on that, Andy?
No, I would say, I kind of like how I laid it out, where the policy, which is the board, more strategic, we're going to do cluster play, et cetera. And then the procedures is, okay, staff, here's your guidance on what you have to consider and things like that. And, it's possible that guidance changes as we get new things. And frankly, I think instead of having to come back to the board every time to change guidance, you just say, you have to inform the board if you're going to change guidance. But we don't have to approve it, we just have to be made aware of it. And therefore, if we want to raise a question, then we can. But guidance I see is more for staff. Here's what you need to think about.
The thing is, I see this guidance as, most of it's fairly strategic. So I would like to see this guidance as the policy, because a lot of this is at a fairly high level, especially when you get down to budget considerations. That's something the board approves anyway. So I think, I just feel like we've got the policy, which is, I find rather thin and duplicative of the guidance. So I think what makes sense in my mind is just call the guidance the policy and have the board approve the cluster play area program guidance as our policy. A couple other comments I have is under budget considerations. It says, annually evaluate and determine the appropriate average of cluster replacement costs. I think what might make more sense is propose a range of costs, so that gives you a little bit more leeway, especially when that goes into the budget. Because what happens if you have an average, you go, okay, then that's just a single number, and then if everything's below that average, then the average keeps creeping downward. But I think if we have a range based on current markets, that'll be a lot more flexible for you in the future. And my last comment with regard to the isochrones, and I realize this sort of makes things suboptimal, but I think if the isochrones are confined to a single village, it makes it a lot easier to engage with that village. Once isochrones start crossing village lines, you've got to start engaging with multiple villages to accomplish a tot lot renovation that makes things just more complicated. So that would, my other suggestion is to keep the isochrones within an entire village. Alan.
And just for balance, I actually had the opposite. Actually, I was thinking about in terms of easements as well, where you had speak to the village manager. It occurred to me that some easements may cross villages and needs to be more than one village manager. I think rather than gerrymander the isochrones to fit villages, just go with the layout of the tot lots as they are. And if it gets more complicated, then it gets more complicated to talk to the right people.
Bill and Karen?
I think that's a good question, but what is the instances of isochrones that cross village? Are there a lot?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, so Owen Brown and Oakland Mills, so like OB 5, 6, and 7, I think are right on the border. And, you know, we would want to consider that when making decisions.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment.
Karen?
My comment was just going to be that the people on Farewell and all the courts off that can literally walk right in, like, in less than 2 minutes, they could be in Owen Brown, they cross a bridge, and I think there's a play area like right there that they have access
There's
to.
one behind Sand Chain, one at Skyward and Fairmead, right?
Yeah.
Those are the
I
two
think
that you're worried
Younghart
about?
and all those courts, I can't remember all the names, but those courts back right up to Stevens Forest on that one side
No,
of Cradle Rock.
you had the one that's downhill from the pool,
Yep.
right? So,
And the other thing too is, the village boundaries aren't nice little, I mean, we've got this weird street that you can only access from Oakland Mills, but it's in Owen Brown.
Latchkey Row belongs to.
Yeah, I mean,
Andy,
so-
if you want to give that up, trade it, for a pick to beach later or something like that.
Yeah, it's just, if you're trying to avoid village boundaries, you may have a hard time.
Yeah.
Just because they're so strange. And you pick the two villages that are, right.
Yeah. I don't know this Phelps Luck does not.
Oakland Mills,
hit
Oakland Mills
Mills like that.
and Owen Brown are the two villages that touch, and then you get Harper's, Hickory Ridge, and Wild Lake. But Long Reach is kind of isolated, Kings Contrivance is kind of isolated. Dorsey is kind of isolated.
Because the only connection is that path in Glenmount, which is not really, that's another HOA that maintains that, that's out of our control. Even if you have all those tot lots along the path that parallels Thunderhill Road, you've got so much, you got to get through the Smith property. And
The Smith property is our giant playground, just in case.
Yeah, right, yeah. So,
Yeah, I realize some villages touch and are like really close together to the point where you can't really tell you're going from one to another easily, and then there are villages like River Hill that are sort of set off. The concern is not so much that having isochrones cross villages is a bad idea in theory. I think it makes things more efficient. The concern is being aware that getting multiple village boards involved in this discussion could make things a lot trickier down the road. That's just an observation. Any other comments on the play area policy?
So, one comment to that, when we identify a cluster, only one of those play areas typically would fail its safety inspection, would fail its safety inspection and need to be replaced. So we would identify the cluster, we would come up with conceptual plans for the cluster, but we would only do one detailed plan for the play area that needs to be replaced. So that's the one we're looking for approval for. We'll present the cluster to both villages if there's overlap, but we're only asking from the one village. Actual approval on the play area that's.
Okay, thanks. That clarifies things a lot. Thanks.
Can you ask Chris if he has any questions?
Oh, Chris, do you have any questions? I actually can't see you.
No, sir. I'm good.
What?
Yeah, he's there.
He's there.
Chris is there. I see him up, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you not able to hear me?
he's speaking, but I can't hear him.
I think you said you had no.
No, I'm here. Are you guys able to hear me or no?
Yeah,
Chris, we can't hear
This
you.
guy's the only one who can hear him.
I'm barely hearing.
I can hear
I am
Chris.
speaking.
None
Can
of
you
us
hear me?
None of us can.
No?
I see him talking, but Can't hear him.
I'm good.
Oh, he's good.
Okay,
He's
he's good.
Okay.
He has questions
That
about the
works.
strategic plan, Andy.
Okay.
You know, I thought like, we've been talking all this time and Eric can't see.
Right?
Yeah, I can't see. I'm relying on Andy.
Ask if he has any questions.
I'm relying on Andy to look at for his hand. That brings us to 4D, the new business, old business agenda format. And I'll also comment that this is inherently related to 4E, the update to the three reading rule, because the three reading rule is actually embedded in the proposed new business, old business update. And where did Dennis go?
This is the board thing, not a Dennis thing.
Okay. So, so that brings us to the three reading, the new business, old business format. Does anyone on the board have any questions regarding the meeting format?
I just
Alan.
want to make it clear, it's my understanding that under this format, minutes will be taken at all meetings and at all parts of all meetings. Is that an accurate?
So everything becomes a meeting now.
I
So, so because everything's a meeting, then minutes need to be recorded at every meeting, by definition. And so, and I believe that's in here, page 4, line 142, minutes shall be the official record of the Board of Directors meetings.
It was asserted by a resident that this doesn't take care of that. I wanted to make sure it took care of it.
I don't think it does. I think that all of our meetings turn into meetings versus work sessions, but it leaves the ability for us to have work sessions, which means that those do not have minutes. Even though we don't have a work session scheduled, we could have a work session that doesn't have minutes.
Yeah, it doesn't preclude us from having work sessions, but for a general course of business, we don't. So we wouldn't necessarily have regularly scheduled work sessions like we do now. We could choose to have a work session, but generally speaking, everything becomes a meeting, and then the meetings would require minutes. Bill?
With the subject of work sessions, I would just say it would be good practice to just record for the minutes the approval of the agenda and the approval of adjournment. If no votes are taken at the meeting, that would suffice for minutes for that particular meeting, and we would all be in good shape. And it's really not a huge lift.
Alan?
Given that, given that it's already been established that everything we do is a meeting, I'm not clear what the advantage is to us of carving out the possibility of a quote-unquote work session.
Sky?
Bill can probably answer that, and I'll be next.
Okay, yeah, just with respect to work sessions, the intent in this revision of the policy was that if we were to have a meeting on a particular topic, like why don't we have a newspaper, or, you know, stream restoration, we could have a work session, have invited guests come in, experts, discuss, interact with the board on a particular topic. That would be a work session. And
I'm just not clear. What's the advantage of calling that a work session versus calling it a meeting in which we have guests and they present?
I think that with respect to how this was written and how we were amending this, the special topic kind of gathering, it's beneficial to set it apart as this is not a normal, meeting of the board in which votes are taken and you're expecting action, right? To say it's a work session to discuss a topic of interest to the community with the board and a panel of experts or a panel of residents or whatever we're doing. But no decision will be made. That kind of says to the general public, this is a different kind of meeting. And that's all that the work session provides, is that we are here to really gather information to, improve understanding. We're not here to make a decision on this particular topic.
I hear you. You haven't convinced me.
Well, fair enough.
But Alan, I'd point out that work sessions now are simply a decision of the board to hold a work session. Everything we're going to do normally is going to be a meeting. And if by some chance a board in the future wishes to hold a work session on a special topic, they have the flexibility to do that.
Or they could hold a meeting on the special topic.
Up to the board, up to the board.
So this is what I'd like to, this is a suggestion. So Ellen, what you can, so this is going to come to a vote in 2 weeks. What you could suggest doing is adding an amendment to this to strike work sessions and strike any
Well, I could, but that's why I'm asking. See if I can be educated.
any instances of work sessions, so that we're clear that everything is a meeting and everything's got to follow the protocols of meetings. Sky?
I see us as combining work sessions and voting meetings into one evening. And the new business is the old work session, and the old business is the old voting meeting. Can I change the subject now? Are we through with that? I have a lot of, first of all, it is explained in here that when minutes are taken, that they are taken according to Robert's rules, in that they only document the motions and the decisions rather than the discussion. So that's going to be a major change. On the first page, we're going to 15 meetings, and I just have no idea why there are 2 meetings in September, 2 meetings in February, and 2 meetings in April. Were those just picked willy-nilly?
So the idea is that, I mean, you could, there's no meetings in August anyway, so you basically want to take that and you want to basically be able to capture that extra meeting. So you don't want to go too long between meetings. But the general idea is that we'd be going from 20 meetings to, I think, 15 or 16 meetings. So the idea is just to sort of space them out so that you have, you're not going too far between meetings, but we're not having meetings every other week.
Could I answer Sky's question? Yeah, those 3 months were chosen very particular. The September one is because we don't meet in August, and we thought in case anything came up, we would hold 2 in September. The February is because that is the budget approval, and so the thought is we should have 2 meetings in February because that's the thing. And then the last one, April, is the wrap-up, and it just gives us 2 meetings to wrap everything up. So that's why those 3 months were chosen for 2 meetings.
Good.
Reg?
All right, thank you. So I was curious, I thought in the past, other boards that was being held, that in August, that if we needed that, it was kind of like a reserve and that it was available to us if we needed it. Is that still true?
So
it's true, but it's sort of as a last resort, I'd say.
Yeah,
Because people take vacations in August. Yeah. It's something we don't necessarily want to try to do or make it a reoccurring theme.
Yeah, no, I understood that. I was just saying, just remember in the past, am I right, Andy, that we would we'd use that as like a ready reserve.
And the other thing, too, you have to remember is this is just the normal meeting schedule.
Yeah.
This does not preclude the chair or the president or the board from saying, hey, we need to meet on X, Y, and Z.
These are the minimum number of meetings.
Yeah.
The actual number might, your mileage may vary. Alan?
Yeah, minor thing, line 122 has a typo. I'm still.
What's the typo?
Corporate.
You know how to spell corporate.
Oh, yeah.
So much for spell check.
So much for spell check.
That's the English spelling.
I still haven't either heard or been convinced by a rationale that says this will make us so much more efficient that we can cut out 25% of our meetings. So I'd love to hear somebody help me understand why 15 meetings will work rather than 20.
So actually, we increase the number of meetings. That's why we're more efficient. We're actually increasing the number of meetings where we can make decisions.
Yeah.
We are.
That is true, but we also are having times for discussion and times for, as Sky said, we're folding the 2 in together. But what we've called in the past work sessions were still meetings. We've been told that quite clearly. what makes us think that we can do it with 25% less? Have we noticed that our meetings are ending at 8:30 and?
I had the same concern, and I would rather have the first year 20 meetings, then maybe cut down if the new model worked well. So maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'd be down to 15. I don't know.
Makes some sense. I like that.
Any other comments?
I guess my final comment is on page 5, it says the BOC is responsible for setting the agendas. I've been to 2 of the BOCs, and the agendas are already written by somebody. And it seems as if the BOC approves the agendas rather than sets the agendas.
I mean, it's just sort of the same thing. So the BOC can modify the agendas during the BOC meetings, and the BOC does modify the agendas during the meetings. So in that sense, the BOC sets the agenda. Bill?
Just one final thought. When I first proposed this policy change, I did not set a meeting schedule, so I'm evaluating it on my own terms. I wanted to make sure everybody knew that I find them interesting, but this was not part of my scope. So just a heads up.
Did anybody want to anybody want to present the case that we can do this with 25% fewer meetings?
I would. I think that having multiple votes for presenting things 3 times creates some continuity, so we don't have to wait to get things done. We can vote earlier than having to skip work sessions. And then the other piece I'd like to offer to you is that you sort of take up whatever room you decide to take up. So rather than starting with 20 and then trying to slowly work backwards, I'd rather go to 15. And then if we find out that we have to continue adding meetings, then we should add meetings. But I think we assume that we're going to need them. So we fill the agenda up with all sorts of things and chat about a lot of good information.
Parkinson's law does exist.
And then that's how we wind up going right to the security alarm, because we fill up that time. I do have one other question. This is, I think, for John Kuch now.
We've done our time.
Well, we're sort of, and this sort of segues into the other part of the 3-meeting rule. So we got a separate 3-reading policy for major motions. And this seems duplicative of Section 6 in the proposed updates to the operating procedures for meetings and work sessions. So the question I have is, can this be basically archived because we already have this in here under Section 6?
Well, I mean, I think if you want to, I guess the answer is yes, but you have to take some action to do that. You could say that this policy is no longer effective, it's separate, and it's because it's incorporated, just so that we know what to do with it.
Yeah, so could we do that then at the next meeting, just say that this is basically subsumed or incorporated in this policy, and just make pass a statement as to that effect when we vote on this policy?
I'm assuming, I guess I would include that within the 3-meeting rules, 3-reading rules.
We certainly discussed it a fair amount.
Right. Making broad.
Yes.
I'll give you the benefit.
Any other comments on the 3-reading rule policy? Ellen?
Again, I'd like the change I see is from 90 to 60, and we think that's a good idea because?
Where do you see 9?
Down on line 20.
Line 20?
Isn't part of that
Because we're voting at every meeting.
Wasn't that also partially consistency, because we had 90 days in one area and 60 days in another area, so it was just bringing it in line with the 60 days.
One of the policies said 60 and the other one said 90.
What does the policy in here say?
60.
In this.
Yeah, it says 60.
What line
Does it say days in both instances?
What line are you looking at?
Line 20.
No, not this policy. The main one, the large one.
I think that I don't remember where it was. That was one that I brought up, and it specifically said, and I read it a few different times, 90 days, 60 days, and that there was a conflict, in my opinion, between the two.
So I think I'd like to try to, if there's any deconfliction between the 60 days here.
I thought we did. I thought that's why we changed it.
Okay, well,
Look at 137 and 138.
137, 138. So that died 60 days. Thank you. So yeah, this is already, so basically this is pretty much all stated in here.
Yes.
So I think to make things clear, at the next meeting, we would move to approve this and archive this as a separate policy. Because I think it'll get too confusing if we have two potentially conflicting parallel policies running around. So that simplifies things. Any other comments? Cool. That brings us to, where's my agenda?
Questions only.
That brings us to questions only under state and local legislation. Any questions only?
Yeah,
Alan.
I have.
Oh, sorry, go
First of all, I have no idea what questions only means, but I'd like to request an after-action review of the CEO search, an after-action review of the strategic plan, and maybe of the year as a whole.
Okay. Alan, do you have questions?
John, I wanted to ask you again about Senate Bill 452, which I believe this report must have come out and put together before, because I understand it actually did pass. It's not. What is it that protects us from increased liability with this new law?
Well, I'm not going to delve into a legal opinion, but I will give you factual reading of the bill. Two things I would say would be responsive to your question. One is that the legislation as approved has an exemption for health club facilities on a contract of longer than 3 months, which is the majority of the contracts that we have. So that's in terms of potential liability, that seems to be a positive development. And the second thing is, as the bill is written, it has an exemption for what's defined as governmental entities. I'm not giving you a legal conclusion that we're a governmental entity, but if you look at the statute for how that is defined in the Maryland Local Tort Claims Act, I would say that our organization falls within that. So the bottom line is we're generally pleased with what happened, and I think it's favorable for the organization.
Thank you, John.
Keith?
I just wanted to ask clarification because putting out after action is appropriate, but typically what it means is that there's a gathering of people to discuss what happened and then a documentation of that process. And we're running out of daylight, so I just wanted to know if you had a sense of timeline or process that you intended.
No, my understanding of an AAR is you discuss what happened, what went well, and what could be improved on in the future. And I don't know, maybe we could invite back the board members in May or June who are no longer board members just for a discussion. And I don't know.
So to clarify, the expectation is this doesn't get accomplished by the end of the fiscal year in a couple weeks. We're not expecting this to be accomplished by April 30th. Bill?
Mr. Chairman, shifting gears a little bit here, since we're getting to the close of our meeting, I just wanted to bring to light something. The Columbia Association family lost a dear member recently. I read in the newspaper that John Hertzen, who was the aquatics director here for a very long time and impacted a lot of lives, passed away recently. I just wanted to mention that he will be sorely missed, and he truly was a treasure to this organization. I personally will miss him, I think anybody in the organization that knew him, and I think anybody in the community that knew him will miss him. And I just want to bring that to light at our meeting here. So, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Proposed new topics?
I think Sky did that.
Yeah, so yeah, Sky already proposed a new topic for doing an after-action report. So that brings us to chair remarks. So I'd like to thank the board for what?
May I?
No, we're actually
Supplement line.
we're actually in board discussion right now.
I'm sorry.
So that brings us to chair remarks. So I'll just note that the next meeting in April is the last meeting of the fiscal year. And of course, we'll have elections. I believe that's this coming Saturday. So people that are running, all the candidates, I wish them the best of luck in their
Next Saturday.
next Saturday.
20th.
Next Saturday. Not this Saturday. A week from Saturday.
It's early voting. People are voting already, I think, in all.
But I believe some villages actually do have early voting ballots out. So
It's the All-Star game.
so yeah, just to remind residents that yes, please vote. So, and I'd just like to thank the board for all their hard work going for this year and going into the last meeting of the year. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn? Motion by Keith, seconded by Karen. Are there any objections to adjourning? Seeing no objections, the meeting is adjourned at 9:22.